Seems to be working again. Thank God. I was so frustrated yesterday when, after the first day back from the hiatus, the system worked, YouTube and Facebook. The second day, it wouldn't work. I went through crazy, jury rigging to get us on the air yesterday. A little bit late. After the show yesterday, I spent some time troubleshooting, finding out that these companies, Mevo and Vimeo, had parted ways. But we seem to have it going again, I think, God willing. So, who's in the house? Shandora from the Bronx. Let me know if it's freezing or sound problems. Shandora from the Bronx, Lucy in Minnesota, Paul in the Great Northwest, Sandy saying good evening, Bella in Florida, Paul is the sound of peace. That was the jungle sounds is what I have during the warm-up since I don't play music during the year of St. Kaddish for my mom. Karen in Northern California, Hoodit in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Renee in Indiana, Melissa in Great Neck, Bill in Mid-Missouri, praying tonight for recently passed theologian in my part of the house of Abraham, John Zazoulas, whose work, particularly his writings on the priesthood of creation that humankind shares, was greatly formative for me. May his memory always be for a blessing. And I actually would like to dedicate tonight's show to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. You see his picture back there. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the last Chabad Rebbe. I meant to do this yesterday, and I was all verklempt, nice Yiddish word, just blah, after all the trouble I had getting online. But yesterday was Yud Shvat, the 10th of the Hebrew month of Shvat. And that's a very important day in the Chabad calendar, right? The Chabad Hasidic movement. And so Yud Shvat was a day on the calendar when the previous Rebbe, Yosef Yitzhak, the sixth Chabad Rebbe, or Lubavitcher Chabad, those terms can be used interchangeably. The sixth Chabad Rebbe died on that date in 1950. And then the Rebbe, Menachem Mendel, whose picture you see there, he assumed the mantle of leadership of the Chabad movement a year later in 1951. And so I'm not a Chabadnik. I wouldn't call myself Chabad Hasid, but I feel a great debt of gratitude to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and all the, unbelievable impact that his leadership, sort of inspired and initiated, all the Chabad rabbis who, would love nothing better than to live in a Chabad community in Crown Heights, for example, in Brooklyn. But he called on them, to create an army of emissaries who would, sort of bring Judaism and Torah, as it were, to Jews all around the world. And now, there's thousands and thousands of shluchim, right, emissaries of the Rebbe. When you talk about a Chabad house, a little synagogue, somewhere in the world, it could be in a town in New Jersey, it could be in a town in Nigeria or in South Africa or in Indonesia or in New Delhi in India. I've been to the Chabad houses. The one in New Delhi in India, I've been to the Chabad house there. There was a very tragic event, another Chabad house in another part of India years ago that we don't need to go into now. But the point is, he sent out an army of emissaries who in no way diluted or dumbed down Judaism, but made it available to people, to Jews around the world and to those who want to learn about Judaism around the world. And we all owe him a debt of gratitude for that. So Yud Shvat was yesterday, and we'll dedicate today's show to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. John in Maine, welcome. PK in Colorado. Paula in Chicago. Sharon says, on my phone it has been freezing, but it's a little better on the computer. And Guy in Ohio. So hopefully the problems have worked out. My stream seems to be running well. Lynn in North Texas. Gwen asked, what was that? But I'm not sure what you were asking. Oh, the nature sounds, right? It's just a recording of jungle sounds that I played during the countdown. Welcome also Diane and Marie and Aoife and Debbie watching on the YouTube side. Okay, welcome everybody. Our daf today, Nazir, daf Yud, page 10. Is a pretty short page, one of the shortest we've ever encountered. So we can go into with a little bit of depth, and I think we'll still, finish in very good time. Okay. So if you have questions or comments, get them into the comments section, either in YouTube or Facebook, and Nina will slip those over to me by the end of the show. Okay. Oh. Does my bell sound funny? Very strange sound tonight. There it is. Let's light up the darkness. Maybe a little bug got in there or something. Better. Okay. So, page 10 here in Tractate Nazir, the laws of nazirus, taking on the vow that one will consecrate himself, will make himself or herself holy to God by abstaining from all grape products, not cutting or shaving one's hair, not making oneself impure by touching a dead body, and taking on the obligation to bring the offerings of the Nazir when the term of nazirus ends. Right? And that's why we don't do this anymore, because since the temple is not standing, you can't bring the offerings that you would have to bring at the conclusion of this term of nazirus, but we of course still study the laws. And then if you say, I am hereby a Nazir, right? So then you would have become a Nazir at that moment. And if you didn't specify the term, then the unspecified term defaults to 30 days. If you did say how long you're going to be a Nazir for, then you would be for that term, as long as it's longer than 30 days. You can't take on Nazirus for less than 30 days. And then there's, you could take on many terms of Nazirus, as we learned yesterday, and you could become a lifetime Nazir like Samson was, and there's all other kinds of ins and outs. But here we are in chapter 2, and tonight discussing Mishna number 2 of chapter 2. So here's the Mishnah. If one said, this cow said, I am hereby a Nazir if I stand up. What? Such a weird statement, but just bear with us. So if a person said, this cow said, I am hereby a Nazir if I stand up, or if this person said, this door says, I am hereby a Nazir if I am open, so Beis Shammai say he is a Nazir, and Beis Hillel say he is not a Nazir. It's like, what? He's talking about a talking cow or a talking door. And as the Gemara will explain, you'll see what we've got is basically a case where a cattle herd or a farmer has a cow that lay down and it won't move, and the man is trying to get the cow to move, and he's so frustrated that he utters something out of frustration. If I can't get this cow to move, I'm going to be a Nazir. He's creating a condition like that, but he's using this weird verbiage of that the cow says, I'm going to become a Nazir. Like the cow is saying about me that I shall become a Nazir if the cow won't stand up. Or the door is speaking and saying that I will become a Nazir if the door won't close. It's this kind of odd formulation that we're talking about. So in that situation, and we'll explain this more when we get into the Gemara, but in that situation, Beis Hillel, right, the followers of Hillel say that guy did not become a Nazir. And Beis Shammai, the house of Shammai, the followers of Shammai, would say that man did become a Nazir. We'll explain why. So Rabbi Yehuda said, right, in regard to this dispute between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, Rabbi Yehuda said, even when Beis Shammai say that the vow is effective, they say so only with regard to a person who said, this cow is hereby forbidden to me as an offering if it stands up. So in that case, it is as if he took a vow that the cow is forbidden. However, Beis Shammai concede that although the vow takes effect, it is not a vow of nazirus. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the plain meaning of the Mishnah, and it's not plain at all, it's such an odd formulation, but the seeming plain meaning of the Mishnah that Beis Shammai say he did become a nazir, no. Beis Shammai, according to Rabbi Yehuda, have said that this person was talking about the cow, like if I can't get this cow to stand up, or if this cow won't stand up, then I'm going to treat beef like it's consecrated, so I will never eat beef again, right? I will treat beef as if all beef in the world is consecrated. Obviously it's not, but it's going to become prohibited to me like something, an object that had been consecrated as a donation to the Holy Temple, which means once it becomes consecrated, I can't make personal use of it. It's the same type of idea as saying meaning I'm not making a vow like this, but just for the sake of teaching, if I were to say, I hereby vow that I will never eat beef again, or I will never eat beef for a period of 30 days, or let's say I will never eat beef again, a different way to speak that vow would be, beef is hereby to me like something that is consecrated, meaning I can't make use of it. It's not that I took my cow and consecrated it to give it to the temple, but I made it so I can't make use of it. I can't sell it, I can't eat it, I can't work it, that kind of thing. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara will clarify what this Mishnah is all about. The Gemara asks, does a cow speak? What are you talking about? The cow is speaking. What is the meaning of the statement, a cow said, I am hereby a Nazirite? Or did the cow say that the cow is hereby a Nazirite? What's going on? Right? So what does it mean that the cow said, I am hereby a Nazirite or Nazir? Nazir is Hebrew, Nazirite is the English translation. Not Nazirite doesn't mean that you come from, Nazareth. It means Nazirite. A Nazirite is a Nazir, right? A Nazir is how, and that's the name of our tractate, but the Hebrew word Nazir means one who has undertaken a vow of Nazirus. So, the cow said, I'm hereby a Nazir. What does this mean? Rami Bar Chama said, with what are we dealing here? We're dealing with a case where there was a prone cow before him. The cow is lying down on the ground. And this man tried, without success, to cause the cow to stand up. And so he said, this cow thinks it will not stand. I am hereby a Nazir, and therefore will refrain from its flesh if it stands of its own accord. And in fact, it stood of its own accord. Now let's back up a second. What? I am hereby a Nazir. Okay, I've declared a vow of Nazirus. And I will therefore abstain from its flesh, meaning I will abstain from eating beef. What does being a Nazir have to do with abstaining from eating hamburgers? Nothing at all. But we're seeing that this person who is speaking is somehow confused or speaking in a confusing way on purpose, like in yesterday's page, right? Where we saw in yesterday's Mishnah that if a person said, I am hereby a Nazir and will therefore stop eating figs, what has he said? Beis Shammai said he became a Nazir and he took a vow not to eat figs. Beis Hillel said when he said he was a Nazir, he might have taken that vow, but when he added, and I will therefore be prohibited from eating figs, or I will abstain from eating figs, he showed that he doesn't understand what nazirus is, and so the whole statement becomes meaningless. And he didn't become a Nazir, and he didn't take a vow to abstain from figs. He said nothing at all. So here, what Rami Bar Chama is saying is that this Mishnah is similar to the previous Mishnah. This person is confused, and he's somehow saying that I will become a Nazir, and because I am a Nazir, I won't eat beef. Now, we know that being a Nazir has nothing to do with abstaining from beef. Because he said that, it's as if he said nothing at all, according to Beis Hillel. Presumably, according to Beis Shammai, he will become a Nazir, and he will have to abstain from eating beef. Let's see what happens. So Rabbi Bar Chama said, with what are we dealing here? We're dealing with a case where there was a prone cow before him, and he tried without success to cause it to stand. And then he said, this cow thinks it will not stand. I am hereby a Nazir, and therefore will refrain from eating its flesh if it stands of its own accord. He made a condition that would turn him into a Nazir. It's almost like he's saying, God, come on, make me a Nazir. What I really need is that this cow stands up. And then the cow stands up. Oh, I became a Nazir, and I won't eat from its flesh. Because what he really needed is just that the cow stands up. And so he was speaking histrionically. He was exaggerating. He was like saying crazy things. But did his crazy statement have an impact? Beis Shammai followed their standard approach, and Beis Hillel followed their standard approach, meaning the standard approach we learned yesterday when the guy said, I am a Nazir and therefore I can't eat figs. So Beis Shammai would say, well, in this case today, same logic, he does become a Nazir and he's not allowed to eat beef. And Beis Hillel, following the same logic as yesterday, would say he doesn't become a Nazir and he is allowed to continue eating beef. Now, the Gemara explains, Beis Shammai, who say that one who vows to be a Nazir and therefore will refrain from eating dried figs and from cakes of dried figs, this person is a Nazir. He became a Nazir. So say that here too, when this guy says, I am hereby a Nazir and therefore will refrain from the cow's flesh, this man becomes a Nazir. Since one does not utter a statement for naught, he meant something, so he is held to the first part of his statement, I am hereby a Nazir. And the following words, and therefore will refrain from eating its flesh, this would be disregarded. Disregarded with respect to whether he became a Nazir or not, but possibly it is taken as a vow that he won't eat flesh anymore, he won't eat beef anymore, at least according to one of the opinions we saw yesterday. And Beis Hillel say that, at least with regard to the first statement, I am a Nazir, and then when he added, and therefore I won't eat flesh, he made that statement meaningless, and so Beis Hillel would rule this man of our Mishnah did not become a Nazir. Now, the Gemara raises a difficulty. But if Rami Bar Chama is correct, didn't Beis Shammai already say this law one time? In other words, we just learned it yesterday in the previous Mishnah that if he says, I am hereby Nazir and therefore can't eat figs, that he did become a Nazir, even though he added a nonsense statement. So why is the Mishnah repeating that law? Isn't it the same here? Now, we have this crazy formulation of the cow doing the talking, but is the principle the same principle? I am hereby a Nazir and I won't eat and therefore I won't eat flesh. Isn't that the exact same kind of statement as I am hereby a Nazir and therefore I won't eat figs? Don't both create the same result, that according to Beis Shammai, he is a Nazir? So what happens, right? But if Rami Bar Chama is correct, didn't Beis Shammai already state this law? Now, according to Rami Bar Chama's explanation, this Mishnah and the previous one differ only with regard to the examples provided, but the principle is identical. Now, Rav has said it is normal for the sages to cite 2 or 3 examples from different cases that offer novel perspectives, although they essentially reflect the same principle. Isn't it just a standard pedagogical technique to bring in several examples to illustrate a point? Because maybe somebody in the group will understand it better given a different example. To say the same principle. And Rabbi Chia also taught 2 or 3 examples with regard to this same issue. And Rabbi Oshaya also said 2 or 3 examples. So what's the big deal if the Mishnah gives another example? Says the Gemara, actually all these cases are necessary. They're not redundant. The extra cases actually teach us something new, like a little nuance that we wouldn't have got otherwise. All these cases are necessary, as If it were stated only that he is a Nazir in this case of dried figs and cakes of dried figs, yesterday's Mishnah, it could have been said that it is only there that Beis Shammai say he becomes a Nazir, since figs are confused with grapes, and it is reasonable to assume that he had grapes in mind. The guy meant to say, I am hereby a Nazir, and therefore grapes are prohibited to me. He said figs, he made a mistake, but clearly his intention was to become a Nazir, and that's why Beis Shammai say he becomes a Nazir. But meat, today's example, I'm hereby Nazir, and therefore I won't eat the flesh of a cow. Who confuses meat with grapes? Nobody confuses that. Meat is certainly not confused with grapes, and it could be that in the case of our Mishnah today, he is not a Nazir, even according to Beis Shammai. Therefore, the Mishnah has to tell us that, yes, even when he speaks of, and therefore I won't eat meat, he still becomes a Nazir, even according to Beis Shammai. And if it were stated only that he is a Nazir, where he vowed that meat was forbidden to him, it could have been said that it is here that Beis Shammai say he is a Nazir, because he was referring to the often paired meat and wine. You go to a restaurant, very often if you have a meat entree, you'll have wine with it. And perhaps that's why he was confused. He was thinking, I am a Nazir, I can't enjoy the luxury of wine, and so I also will have to abstain from the luxury of meat. Somehow these things do go together in his mind. He was confused about that second clause, but he really did intend to become a Nazir. And so that's why Beis Shammai say he's a Nazir in this example, but in the case of figs, which are not luxurious at all, have nothing to do with wine, there they might have said, no, he doesn't become a Nazir when he makes such a weird mistake as confusing figs and grapes. Therefore, both examples were necessary to teach us that Beis Shammai would rule this man as a Nazir, whether he added the unnecessary clause about abstaining from figs or abstaining from meat. In either case, it was because he was a little bit confused about what he was saying, but he intended to become a Nazir, and therefore he becomes a Nazir. And now let's look at Beis Hillel's ruling, that whether he adds, I'm hereby a Nazir, and therefore I won't eat figs, or I'm hereby a Nazir, and therefore I won't eat meat, that in both cases he does not become a Nazir. Why does Beis Hillel need both examples? And if it were stated only that he is a Nazir with regard to these two cases of figs and meat, it could be said it is in these cases that Beis Shammai say he is a Nazir, but in the case of a door, right, this is the third example now, that in today's Mishnah it said, and if the door will not close, or if the door will not open, then I am a Nazir. And what did the Mishnah say exactly? That if this man said that the door says, I am hereby a Nazir if I am opened, right? So it's like he needs to get the door open, and he's going to say, okay, if you open the door, I'll be a Nazir. I mean, I'm reminded of the old joke, man is terribly late for a meeting. If he doesn't reach this meeting in time, he's going to lose the biggest sale of the year. If he loses the biggest sale of the year, for his business, then his business is going to tank. He's going to go bankrupt. Terrible things are going to happen to him. So he needs that parking spot. And he's driving, looking for the parking spot, and he can't find it. He says, God, please, I need the parking spot. If you give me a parking spot, I'll give 10% of my income to charity. No parking spot. God, if you give me this parking spot, I'll give 20% of my income to charity. God, if you give me the parking spot, I'll give 20% of my income to charity, and I'll call my mom every day. And then right in front of the building where he needs to go, a car pulls out of a spot, the opening he needs. And what does this man say? Never mind, God, I got it. Right? So it's sort of like this guy. He says, I need the door open. If you open the door, I'll become a Nazir. Does he want to become a Nazir? Does he want to become a Nazir? Right? So in the case of a door, Beis Shammai might concede to Beis Hillel that such a statement certainly does not constitute a vow of Nazirus. Therefore, this case had to be stated as well. Beis Shammai would say, if this guy says, I am a Nazir and therefore I will not open this door, or I am a Nazir and therefore I will keep this door open forever, which has nothing to do with Nazirus, Beis Shammai would say he became a Nazir, and his statement about keeping the door open or closed, whatever, that doesn't matter. We can deal with that later, whether he made a vow about the door or not. But the fact is, he became a Nazir. Beis Hillel would disagree. Therefore, this case had to be stated as well. And conversely, if it taught only the case of a door, the opposite could be said, that in this case, Beis Hillel says no nazirus. But in those two earlier cases, maybe Beis Hillel would concede to Beis Shammai that the individual does become a nazir. Therefore, all three examples had to be given, that in all three cases, Beis Hillel does not concede to Beis Shammai, and according to Beis Hillel, and that it became the law, that the man who speaks in this confusing way about becoming a Nazir does not become a Nazir, because he's showing he doesn't understand what a Nazir is, and therefore he undermines his own declaration. So after providing the answer to one difficulty raised against Rami Bar Chama's explanation, Rava presents another problem. Rava said, is the Mishnah teaching if it stood of its own accord? The Mishnah states, if it stands, and does not mention the condition of on its own accord. Meaning, was this guy creating a condition that I will become a Nazir if the cow stands up? Or was he creating a condition, I will become a Nazir if I can get this cow to stand up? So if it's the latter one, right, I will become a Nazir if I can get this cow to stand up. And then without him touching the cow, it just stands up by itself. Did he become a Nazir? So that's the question being asked right now. So Rava said, is the Mishnah teaching if it stood of its own accord? The Mishnah states, if it stands, and it does not mention the condition of on its own accord. So rather, Rava said, the Mishnah is referring to a case where there is a cow lying on the ground before him, and he said, it is incumbent upon me to bring the offering of a Nazir, meaning he's going to become a Nazir and bring the offering at the end of his period of Nazirus. Or perhaps he's saying, I will bring the offerings to the temple that a Nazir would bring when he finishes his Nazirus. I'm not going to become a Nazir, but I pledge to bring the offerings of a Nazir. That would be a different pledge. But in either case, right? The man might have said, or might have intended to say, it is incumbent upon me to bring the cow as the offering of a Nazir. And in this way, the individual accepts Nazirus upon himself. So the Gemara raises a difficulty. Well, granted, a cow can be an offering, right? You can bring a cow as an offering in the temple, as opposed to a donkey, right? A donkey can never be an offering in the temple, but a cow can, and that's actually a huge offering, right? Like a cow's very expensive animal, much, much, much more expensive than a lamb or even a sheep. A cow is a big offering, right? The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, brings an ox on Yom Kippur, right? That's a huge offering that he brings, and it's like a big, big ceremony. Most people do not bring cows. But this guy might have said, I will bring a cow. So granted, a cow can be an offering. But can a door be an offering? If you're explaining this, that he's saying, okay, if I can get this cow to stand, or if it stands, I'll bring a cow as the offering of a Nazir, and that's what he meant to say, well, that's an interesting interpretation of his statement, but you can't extend that interpretation to that other example of if I can get the door open, I'll become a Nazir, because a door obviously has nothing to do with bringing an offering in the temple. So rather, Rava said, this is what it means. If this is a case where there was a cow lying before him, and the cow refused to stand. And so the man said, now we're on 10b, I am hereby a Nazir, and therefore will refrain from wine if it does not stand, since I will force it to do so. And then it stood of its own accord without him causing it to stand. Okay, now why do we bring wine into this? If you say, I am hereby a Nazir and therefore will abstain from wine, you're just demonstrating that you know what Nazirus is, right? You don't have to say, and will therefore abstain from wine. But adding those words didn't in any way contradict your initial statement. So you're saying, I am hereby a Nazir. The condition that he put on him becoming a Nazir is, I will become a Nazir if I can make the cow stand up. But then it stood by itself. So did he become a Nazir or not? You could argue, well, you saying I will become a Nazir if I can get the cow to stand up, those words made the cow stand up. Maybe heaven decreed that you should be a Nazir, and that's why the cow stood up at that moment. Or you could say, no, the cow stood up by itself. He didn't cause it to stand up. So his condition was not fulfilled, and that's why he does not become a Nazir. So it is a case where there was a little cow lying before him that was refusing to stand, and he said, I'm hereby a Nazir, and therefore will refrain from wine if the cow does not stand. Okay, so if the cow does not stand, since I will force it to do so, and it stood of its own accord without him causing it to stand. So in that case, Beis Shammai hold, the man's intention is based upon him having him forcing the cow to stand up. And he did not force it to stand. It stood by itself. Since he did not cause it to stand, his vow of nazirus takes effect, right? He said, I will become a Nazir if, right? What did he say exactly? I am hereby a Nazir, and therefore refrain from wine, if it does not stand by itself, since I will force it to stand, right? So if I force it to stand, then I become a Nazir. If it stands by itself, then I do not become a Nazir, right? He did not have it stand. Now, the man's intention, according to Beis Shammai, is based upon him having it stand by his own hand. Since he did not make it stand, then I would think he did not make it stand. I am hereby a Nazir if it does not stand. It did stand by itself. Now I'm confused. Let's see what it says. And Beis Hillel hold, his intention is based upon the fact that it was lying down. And now it has stood. Since the cow stood up, it does not matter what caused it to stand, and therefore his vow of nazirus does not take effect, right? He said, I am a Nazir if it does not stand. It did stand, so he is not a Nazir, according to Beis Hillel. According to Beis Shammai, he said, I am a Nazir if I have to force it to stand. All right? I'm so confused. I am hereby Nazir if it does not stand. Right? So it did stand up, even though he didn't. If it does not stand, so he should become a Nazir. Now, if he forced it to stand, what was the condition that he said? They're arguing about what was the implied condition. Did he simply mean, I am a Nazir if it doesn't stand? End of story. It did stand, so he doesn't become a Nazir. It doesn't matter whether he forced it to stand or it stood by itself. He said, I'm a Nazir if it doesn't stand, so he does not become a Nazir according to Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai say, no. What he meant was, he is going to be a Nazir if it stands of its own accord, and that's what happened, whether or not, he expressly said he's only going to become a Nazir if he has to force it to stand. Something like that. So the Gemara asks, so if so, say the latter clause of the Mishnah like this. Rabbi Yehuda, right, in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said, you misunderstood a little bit what Beis Shammai was saying. Right, in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said, even when Beis Shammai say that the vow is effective, they say so only with regard to the one who said, the cow is forbidden to me as an offering if it stands up. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even Beis Shammai would say, no, he doesn't become a Nazir. But since he talked about that something would be prohibited to him like a Nazir, what happens is that the beef of the cow becomes prohibited to him. That's Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation of what Beis Shammai had held. So now the Gemara is commenting on that and says, if so, say that the latter clause of the Mishnah is like this. Rabbi Yehuda said, even when Beis Shammai said that the vow is effective, they said so only with regard to one who said, they are hereby forbidden to me as an offering. But does he take a vow and extend any prohibition to the cow? Since, according to this approach, he explicitly mentions nazirus, the cow is not rendered forbidden, but is merely the subject of a condition of the vow. So why does Rabbi Yehuda speak of a prohibition on the cow? It would seem like all we've been talking about is, does he become a nazir or not? And he tied it to whether the cow stood up or didn't stand up, whether he forced the cow to stand up or it stood of its own accord. Either way, he's saying whether or not I become a nazir is conditional, and the condition is whether or not this cow stands up. Now it seems like Rabbi Yehuda is saying, no. Since he said, I am hereby a nazir and therefore will abstain from eating the beef of the cow, he doesn't become a nazir, but he is prohibited to eat the beef of a cow, like he took a vow that beef would be prohibited to him. So the Gemara offers a different explanation. Rather, the Mishna is referring to a case where the man said, I am hereby a nazir, and therefore will refrain from eating its flesh. Totally illogical, makes no sense. Cows have nothing to do with nazirus, but he said it. I'm hereby a nazir, and therefore will refrain from eating its flesh if, here's the condition, if the cow does not stand. And then the cow stood of its own accord. So Beis Shammai hold, the man's intention is based upon him having it stand by his own hand, right? Beis Shammai is reading into the situation that this man was trying to get the cow to stand up. And he says, I am a nazir if I can't get it to stand up. But then it stands up by itself. So does he become a nazir or not? So the man's, according to Beis Shammai, right, the man's intention is based upon him personally making the cow stand. And then he didn't do that. The cow stood by itself. Since he did not cause it to stand, his vow of prohibition takes effect, that he will be prohibited from eating the cow. And Beis Hillel hold, the man's intention is based upon the fact that the cow was lying down and now it stood up. So his vow to become a nazir or to prohibit something to himself, none of it took effect. Now the Gemara asks, and do Beis Hillel hold that if the cow does not stand, he will become a nazir? But didn't they say that if one states, I am hereby a nazir and will refrain from cow's flesh, this person is not a nazir? As they just ruled in the case where one states that he is a Nazirite, he's a Nazir, and therefore won't eat figs, right? We learn if he simply said, I am a Nazir, and therefore I won't eat figs, according to Beis Hillel and the law, the halacha, he doesn't become a Nazir. So why do we need to add that here, if he says, I am a Nazir, and therefore won't eat beef, he doesn't become a Nazir? Full stop. See, he uttered a confusing statement, and therefore his vow of Nazirus does not take hold. So the Gemara answers, and I'm almost done. This was a short page. So if you have a question or comment, get it in. The Gemara answers, they stated their opinion in accordance with the reasoning of Beis Shammai. Right? Beis Hillel is saying, well, even according to your reasoning, we come to the same conclusion. According to our opinion, Beis Hillel, even if the cow does not stand, he is also not a Nazir, since Nazirus takes effect only if he vowed that products of the vine are forbidden to him. However, according to your reasoning, that you say he is a Nazir, in any event, concede to us that this man's intention is based upon the fact that the cow was lying down and now it stood up. So the Nazirus should not take effect. And Beis Shammai hold, isn't the man's intention based upon him forcing the cow to stand up? And since even if it stood up of its own accord, the fact is his condition that I will remain a Nazir if I can't make this cow stand up. And he didn't make the cow stand up, and that's why he becomes a Nazir, according to Beis Shammai, according to this interpretation of what was going on with this emotional farmer who's suddenly taking vows of Nazirus because he can't get his cow to stand up. I think there's an underlying lesson here, very important one. That when we're emotional, when we're frustrated, that is not a time to undertake pledges, vows, plans. It's not the time to reach out to that difficult person in your life that you've been trying to reach, right? Don't try to communicate effectively in the midst of your rage. You gotta hit that holy pause button. Gather yourself, get some counsel, figure out how you're gonna proceed. Right? And then is the time to communicate with the difficult person or to make the pledge or take the vow or whatever, but don't do it in the midst of your emotion. I don't know where I just saw this, some video somewhere. I don't think it's from a Jewish source, but it's lovely. I can't remember where I read this, but I read, you cannot see your reflection in boiling water. You can only see your reflection in still water, right? So you've got to let that rage cool off so that the water becomes still. Then you can see your reflection in it there. Then you know where you stand. Right? All right, let's go to questions or comments. Nazir, Daf Yud, Nazir, page 10. Bill, can one say beef is forbidden to me, but still eat dairy? Or if you forbid beef, does it expand to the whole cow, as it were? Okay, so I think that, it's like, what is the exact formulation? For sure, right? The Chachamim, the sages would say to you, what exactly was said? I believe that the formulation, the flesh of the cow is forbidden to me, means I can't eat the beef, right? If he says the cow is forbidden to me, then I'm sure that the dairy would be included also, probably. Not that, they probably analyzed this somewhere else. If he says that this cow is konam to me, right? This cow is like a consecrated offering, right? So then he can't eat it. He can't milk it. He can't work it. He can't use it to pull his cart. He can't sell it and derive benefit from it, right? So if it becomes prohibited to him like it was consecrated, then he can't make any use of it whatsoever. But if he limited his vow and said, its flesh is prohibited to me or its milk is prohibited to me, monetary benefit is regarding this cow is prohibited to me. It depends what he said, right? What were the exact words? Sharon, judging by the laws of kashrut, milk is not treated as beef. In fact, kosher cheese is kosher because it cannot have rennet, as it is a byproduct of a cow. Right, exactly. So Sharon's getting more specific here. But it's interesting, right? Like what makes kosher cheese kosher, which he's referring to, is that in the processing, the Jews cannot mix meat and dairy at all. And actually, most cheese that people eat in the world, part of its processing is an animal product. Rennet is added to that, and that would render that cheese unkosher. For cheese to be kosher, it has to be made with no animal products, no meat products inserted into the into the cheese. Karen, a modern Nazir, Rabbi David Cohen, took the vow as a response to World War I, and he was a Nazir for life, so he didn't need to bring the ending offerings. Wouldn't this still have been controversial in his time? If, for example, he had run into impurity, he would have had no opportunity for atonement. Right, exactly. That's the problem. I think what he really did, like if a modern person takes on a vow of Nazirus and they know what they're talking about, they would be saying, I will take a vow like Nazirus, right? You can't really do Nazirus. And what Karen is referring to is the problem with if you said today that I will become a Nazir, even if you say I will become a Nazir for life. So then you're saying, well, if the problem is bringing offerings at the end of my term of Nazirus, well, at the end of my term, I'll be dead, so I couldn't bring the offerings anyway. So the fact that the Holy Temple is not standing and I can't bring offerings to the temple at the conclusion of my term of Nazirus becomes irrelevant since he's never going to bring these offerings since his term will only end when he dies. But what Karen is pointing out is that, however, if a Nazir comes into contact with a dead body, his Nazirus is interrupted. He has to bring special offerings at that point, and then he starts his Nazirus over again. if the temple is not standing, all of that is not possible, and that's why we don't undertake nazirus in modern times. So if a knowledgeable person like this rabbi that you're talking about undertook nazirus, I think he was really undertaking a vow like nazirus in order to, make a point and beseech God's mercy for his community. And finally, Spencer, I think the case of the figs and the case of the cow are different. Fig is declarative. I will become a Nazir and I won't eat figs. And the cow case is conditional. If the cow stands up, I will become a Nazir. Exactly. Just so. I think that's a very, very important difference that we have here. And sometimes what we'll see as they're discussing whether a person became a Nazir or not is he used the words of conditionality, but he didn't bring in that connective word if, right? He said, he meant the condition. I will become a Nazir if the cow stands up or if the cow doesn't stand up. But what he says is, the cow says, I will be a Nazir and therefore I won't eat beef. How do we get to the conditionality about whether the cow stands or not? No, standing was part of the mission, but the original mission was the cow said, I'm hereby a Nazir if I stand up, right? So the word if was there. But I think sometimes in other cases we'll see that the word if is missing, and the sages will argue, was a condition created or was an additional clause added? And, the context will be obviously a big part of that analysis, as it so often is. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. Remember our schedule. On Fridays, the class is at noon Pacific time, right? Noon Pacific, since we're getting ready for Shabbat the rest of the afternoon. So tomorrow, God willing, we'll be together at noon Pacific right here. Have a great night.